welcome to all aspiring music collectors alike. My name is Jay and I'm the record guy. So, today in my first video, I thought I would do a bit of a general record suggestion kind of thing. So the idea is that I've picked through my collection a bit and I'm going to throw some suggestions for records for new collectors to get their hands on, whether original, reissues, old, new, whatever it might be. If you were like me 2 to 3 years ago, you wouldn't have too much money to spend on records like this. You would be in a bit of a place where, do I get the greatest hits so I can see a wide range of what this band has to offer? Or do I get an album so that I can experience it entirely? Because it can be a bit of a trap to fall into, especially when you don't have too much money to be throwing around. For example, let's say you pick up Queen's greatest hits and you hear Seven Seas of Rye. Great song, but you're not getting the experience of Queen 2 that way. So I've decided to pick through my collection and I'm going to share a few of them today. And some of these are going to be expected by more seasoned collectors. Some of them maybe not. We'll see. So the first we're going to talk about is one of the classic hard rock staples from the 1980s, AC/DC's Back in Black. This is an original German issue because, to my knowledge, an original Australian could be big money if it's in great condition. This is one of those albums that doesn't really need much introduction, let's be real. It's a classic hard rocker. It's probably their most iconic album alongside Highway to Hell. The title track has about as much notoriety as Highway to Hell. It's one of the most iconic rock songs of all time, regardless of AC/DC. Hell's Bells, Shoot to Thrill, Give the Dog a Bone, Let Me Put My Love Into You, You Shook Me All Night Long. I mean, these are hard rock staples. These songs have been everywhere, maybe to the point that you're sick of some of them, but I can't say that this album doesn't deserve it. If you see this, I would say try and get an original issue from like the UK or from Germany, an issue that's cheaper than Australian, or if you really have to, get a reissue. They're not that expensive and it's well worth the money. Next up on our list, staying in the classic hard rock realm of the 80s, we have Whitesnake, Saints and Sinners, another beautiful UK original copy, a bit beaten up, but it still sounds absolutely great. So, this wasn't my first Whitesnake album, that actually goes to Come and Get It, but it's the Whitesnake album that I absolutely fell in love with. Now, it's an album that a lot of people have heard of, I think, and especially the band, most people have heard of. David Coverdale as a vocalist is honestly kind of unchallenged in a lot of regards. His range and his presence on this album especially is out of this world. From the driving, beating opening of Young Blood to Rough and Ready, Victim of Love, bluesy sleazy, to Here I Go Again, a well-remembered iconic Whitesnake song, Love and Affection, Rock and Roll Angels. I mean, this album is chock full of Whitesnake hits. But the best one for me, especially for the impact it can have in live performances, the soulful, the melodic, Crying in the Rain. That's a song that if you haven't heard Coverdale sing, you are missing out because it's the performance of a lifetime. Buy it. Okay, we're going to reverse a few years now and we're going to talk about something revolutionary. Haha! Van Halen by Van Halen, 1978. This is a nice UK original. Now, what needs to be said about Van Halen? The fact that Eddie Van Halen himself was a guitar prodigy unlike anything we've ever seen, maybe since Hendrix. The fact that David Lee Roth demonstrates an amazing vocal range from up here, high and shrieky, almost to the levels of Rob Halford, to being able to come down here to be a bit more bassy, a bit more boomy, full and deep. This album is just legendary. Now, I could talk all day about Eruption, I could. It's a couple of minutes of pure guitar audio bliss, the kind of which had probably never been heard in that way before. He might not have invented tapping, but he absolutely pioneered this signature style of it. As for the other songs on this album, there's so many that deserve a great mention. Running with the Devil with that almost heartbeat, that powerful bass line at the start that's just bum, 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 bum. It just hits you. Jamie's Crying is great. On Fire is great. Little Dreamer is quite enjoyable. I would say that my favourite though on this album is the ever inimitable Atomic Punk. This might be an obvious one, but it's obvious for a reason. Original or reissue, doesn't matter, get it. Going back another few years now, we're going to go to an interesting pick, which some may expect and some might not. We're going to go with Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. This is a nice original UK issue with the limited edition golden stamp. Not so limited, but who knows. So, why pick this album, you might say? If you want Ritchie Blackmore, you might look at stuff in Deep Purple or things like that. But there's a couple of reasons. For a start, this album is quite influential in being one of the pioneers for the earlier sword and shield, sword and sorcery, kind of fantasy-laden stylings of that kind of side of heavy metal. You know, the kind of stuff that you would get from Queen in the early days, the stuff that you might get from Iron Maiden. It's great in that regard. And also, because it's one of the albums that is introducing people to a little-known vocalist named Ronnie James Dio, one of the arguably greatest voices in heavy metal history. This album is a great demonstration of his skills too. From the iconic opening, Man on the Silver Mountain, not to be confused with I've Got a Silver Machine from Hawkwind. Black Sheep of the Family is a groovy, bopping kind of song. Snake Charmer, The Temple of the King. I mean, this is an album that you've got to hear to really understand, honestly. Because it might look kind of goofy, almost kiddish, like, what is this My Little Pony set piece? But trust me, don't judge it by its cover. Or do, honestly. It's quite cool once you actually look at the castle itself up close. But yeah, give it a listen. It's honestly amazing. We're going to go into some new wave now. Here's one that you probably expect from that period. We have The Police, Regatta de Blanc. So this is their second album and probably the one that put them to prominence a bit more than Outlandos d'Amour, although that's a great album as well. This one has some great new wave classics and also a couple of Police songs that just, never mind becoming cultural zeitgeist, they became so ingrained in our memory that some people will sing them and not even know that it's The Police. I mean, Walking on the Moon. Kids today have probably heard that in commercials alike and probably don't know who the heck it is that's singing that. But there's a lot of other great material on this as well. And the best thing about the Police albums typically is that originals are usually dirt cheap to find in playable condition. Message in a Bottle needs no introduction. Best song on the album by far. Amazing song. Regatta de Blanc is a great, sleazy, swoony kind of instrumental break between Message in a Bottle and the next song, It's Alright For You, which is upbeat, energetic, has some of the vibes from the first album. Walking on the Moon, great classic, can't really argue with that. Contact, No Time, This Time. Honestly, it's an album that you just can't get away without listening to. It's brilliant. So yeah, find one and pick it up. Okie dokie, we're going to stretch into the 1960s a little with this one, and I hope it's a bit of a curveball because when people say Pink Floyd, they'll probably suggest to you to get either Dark Side of the Moon or maybe The Wall. But I'm going to go ahead and throw a curveball and say Piper at the Gates of Dawn, the debut album, on a lovely glossy laminated sleeve here. So, why the debut album, would I say? For one, I just can't escape the love I have for the influence and the quirkiness of Syd Barrett, the original vocalist on this album. It's just whimsical, it's true psychedelic rock, and this album explores so many weird themes, compositions and complexities that would become staples in the band's career and the band's sound, even without Syd Barrett at the helm. The influence that he left is unmistakable. For example, space rock feeling songs like Astronomy Domine and Interstellar Overdrive, and then really weird, quirky, sort of poetry, I guess, inspired like fantasy songs like The Scarecrow and The Gnome. It's a weird album, but it's weird in that late 60s psychedelic rock kind of way that you really have to listen to start understanding it, because the cover gives you a bit of an idea, but it's a lot trippier than this, trust me. Don't get an original if you don't have the money for it. It's going to run you a lot. I would say get a decent 70s issue. This is a 70s UK issue, I'm pretty sure. Not too expensive, great condition. Have a go. Now we're going to fast forward to the modern day a little bit from an album that I believe was it 2008 or 2011? I can't quite remember. But so an album that kind of defines the emo, punk, pop explosion, My Chemical Romance, The Black Parade. This is an album that, if you were growing up as a teenager at the time, you know this album, you heard this album, you probably lived and breathed this album. And if you are older, maybe you didn't get it, or maybe you gave it a chance and realised that behind all the angst and all the edgy appearances, this is one of the most musically complex and interesting albums of the first 20 or so years that we've had in the 21st century. Genuinely, it is so amazing to me how this album, despite its appearances, managed to be one of the most gripping and enticing concept albums of its kind, and really did put a light on how, despite appearances, these kind of bands could be shockingly mature and way ahead of what you'd think them capable of being. With songs like The End, Dead, the iconic Black Parade, House of Wolves, Mama, and of course Teenagers, that's probably my favourite on this album, it's one that is a great listen from start to finish. Pick it up if you can. An original might be pricey, but there's plenty of reissues out there, and they sound great. Give it a go. Now, what kind of pop punk fan would I be if I didn't then go right ahead and mention another one that's probably expected? This is one that you'll see plastered across the walls in HMV or Walmart, wherever you're buying your records from a typical retailer. Green Day, American Idiot. Maybe this one is a bit of a head scratcher because, really? He's talking about American Idiot? What can I say? It's a great album from start to finish. Another great album that shows just what pop punk bands were capable of despite their gruff, angsty appearances. So this is one that probably influenced a lot of teenagers growing up in the 2000s. I know it did for me, certainly. Some of these songs have entered the zeitgeist as far as the influence, like American Idiot, Holiday, Boulevard of Broken Dreams. But a lot of them also have done so in the way of being kind of early guitarist rhythm songs, you know. They're simple pop punk songs. They're fun, they're easy, but they're also enjoyable. It's an album that I think deserves the love and adoration that it's gained over the years, and it's one that I spin quite regularly. I would say an original is also quite expensive, as a lot of the 2000s records tend to be. So get a reissue of this and have an enjoyable listen. Okay, back to the 80s, 1980 to be precise. Here's another one that you probably think is a bit expected, but I have a bit of a reason for this one. Ace of Spades by Motorhead. Their most iconic album, definitely. It's the one you'll see most stocked in like HMV and Walmart. Again, wherever your typical retailer sells their records on the side. But there's an interesting thing about this album that I want to talk about, because I feel like the title track, as great as it is, kind of overshadows the other great material that's on this album. It is a monstrous heavy metal masterpiece, a landmark of its genre, up there with like the Iron Maiden debut, for example. Ace of Spades is a great song, but how often do you hear Love Me Like a Reptile, Fast and Loose, We Are the Road Crew, Jailbreak? That's Jailbait. This is a destructive album, start to finish. All killer, no filler. It's savage. It was Motorhead at their absolute best. And you can see why this became the fan favourite, the collector's favourite. So, I don't know what I can say. If you don't have this, you are missing out on one of the best heavy metal albums of all time. This is an original UK issue on the bronze label. It cost me about £25. Not too hard to find in good playable condition. Give it a go. Okay, staying around this kind of time period now, we're going to go to sort of new wave punkish again with London Calling by The Clash. Another one of those records that's like, oh, it's that album, the one everybody knows. So, an interesting story with this one. So this is an original UK issue in decent condition, bit of ring wear, but the records sound great, that I found in Vinyl and Vintage, an independent record store in Wolverhampton, a great shop. Check it out if you're ever in the town. Sorry if you are, because it's terrible here. And I saw this on the wall of like expensive collectible items. It was about £60. And I thought to myself, I was in a very big punk phase at the time, you know, your Sex Pistols, as much as I don't really like them, the Ramones, the Police, all this kind of stuff. And I saw this and I thought, you know what, I've heard about this album. I've not heard anything except the title track. I might as well give it a go. So I brought it home, I spun it, and I was pleasantly surprised at the musical influences that make this album such an eclectic and really broad listen. Songs like Brand New Cadillac, Spanish Bombs, Lost in the Supermarket, Coca-Cola, and probably my favourite, Revolution Rock. There's just so many great influences on here. I think you can feel influences from from ska, beat bop, reggae. Reggae is a great influence on new wave in general. And of course, the typical punky rock clashness that comes to define The Clash. I mean, the title track itself is great, but you're doing yourself a disservice if you skip out on the rest of this album. It's great. A reissue might do you better for your money, but an original is not too hard to find in good condition if you can get a good deal. If you need to get a reissue, absolutely, just give this album a try. Okay, we're going to take a step back to the 60s now, and pardon me, gosh damn, that was a pet sound almost, wasn't it? Beach Boys pet sounds. 1966, I believe. We have an original mono issue here on Capitol Records. This is the album that inspired Sgt. Pepper, I believe, because Rubber Soul came out. The Beach Boys were so invigorated and Brian Wilson was like, I need to do better. So they made this. And as far as being a contender to Beatles' Rubber Soul, it's definitely up there. Songs like Wouldn't It Be Nice, You Still Believe in Me, I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, Caroline, No. This is just, wow. Brian Wilson's masterpiece through and through. It might not be the Beach Boys you're used to, you know, the run, run, get around kind of stuff. But if you don't listen to this, you're missing out on just how much more complex and deep the band could be, and just how great they could sound with something like this. It's not something to listen to if you want, like, you know, your rocky edge stuff that gets your head banging. It's one that you sit down and listen to be contemplated, to be thoughtful, to be whimsical, I suppose. So yeah, I would definitely say get an original mono if you can. Might be expensive though. There is the 50th anniversary, I believe, mono remaster, which to my knowledge is an analog cut, so that might be good for your money. In any case, give it a listen. So that was all of my beginner record suggestions for new collectors to try out. There's definitely plenty I could have touched on. I mean, it's an endless, vast ocean of possible choices. But these were just some of the few I thought that were good to sort of put a spotlight on for a bit of a range. You know, there's obviously other genres that I haven't touched on, which I just don't have the records to really do so with. You know, your blues, your full-on reggae, your hip-hop, your rap, your R&B, all this and that. There's stuff from all of those genres which other YouTubers, I'm sure, can absolutely inform you on. But as far as these choices, I think it's a decent enough range to get your typical collector who wants to get their rock, their punk, their blues, that kind of stuff, to get a little bit started. So, if you like these choices, I would love to hear. If you pick one of them up for the first time and have a listen, I would love to hear what you think. If there's other albums you think should have been shouted out, please do let me know as well so I can know for the future. I have been Jay the Record Guy. Keep spinning.